All right, you're now all on the record. Everybody who is here is don't say anything you wouldn't want to be hijacked and displaced all over the internet. Um, we are continuing our regular class. Pretty good timing. We are talking about the book of Leviticus. We are talking about the subject of holiness. Okay, holiness. What is holiness about? What does it mean to be holy? Okay, we've already defined holy. Holiness has to do with creating a space in the world for God. I have already described for you how it is the function, the mission statement, the purpose of the Jewish people, the reason they were taken out of Egypt by God and brought to Mount Sinai. Their function was stated clearly. You are to be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Your vocation is to teach the world the lesson that you have learned or are now learning, to teach the world what it means to be a place for God. Israel's task was to bring the world to God. How do you do it? You take every aspect of the world, every aspect of life, and you attempt to make it holy. Last week, we dealt with the subject of time. You'll remember I said to you last week, what was the first thing in the Torah that was called holy? Book of Genesis was God created the Sabbath day. It was time. The first thing that was called holy, God rested on the seventh day. He ceased from work. He blessed the Sabbath day and he sanctified it, which means he made it holy, the word holy. Why did he do it? Because when God removed his presence from the world and he was now ready for human beings, people, to bring him back in, he had to start with something. And what did he start with? Not with space. He started with time. Okay. God is beyond time, beyond space. When he clears the way, when he contracts, when he goes through this process of tzimtzum, he concentrates himself and he creates a place for all the world. Time, God creates a space for time. Every 7 days, because God rearranged this, the Jewish people are supposed to, according to the Torah, not be creatures, not be manipulators, not be consumers, not be handlers. They are to merely be creatures with everything else in the universe. Every time on Shabbat, we keep the Sabbath day and we observe it in the way that we should. We are remembering that we are not the masters of the world. We are not the owners of this world of ours, but that we are subject to the power of God. And God indicated, placed his seal of holiness in the world by giving us himself the Sabbath day. God created it. Jews didn't create it. Okay. God created the seventh day, and that seventh day, the Shabbat, became a pattern for all the other holidays in the Jewish calendar. I told you last week, it's not a coincidence. If you count the holidays in the Jewish calendar and you count them up, the major holidays that are spoken of by the Bible, not the rabbinic holidays, not the later holidays, what are they? Passover, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. Isn't it interesting that God creates the world in 7 days to implant holiness in our day-to-day lives, and then turns around and the Jewish people are ordered to take 7 times in their calendar year and to implant God's presence in the world. On these 7 occasions, God says, you will remember your encounter with me, and you will celebrate these historic events when you, the Jewish people, and I, God, met with each other in the course of history. And then we saw that not only is it 7 holidays in the Jewish year, the pattern, the 7 days of creation, but we saw that every 7 years we have a year called Shemitah, when the land lies fallow. Every set of 7 times 7, 49 years. The year after that is called Jubilee. So this magic number of 70 is woven into the entire process. Holiness is not insignificant or optional. 7 is not a natural number. I told you last time. 10 is a natural number, 10 fingers, okay? 30, 29, 30, the time of the moon, natural number. 365, a natural number. 7 has no natural meaning to it. No one can figure out where 7 came from. The answer is 7 came from God, and it planted it in his world. And then the Jewish people took it and used it as a pattern to make all of time, the years, the months, and the days, the years, and the months and the years holy. So this is a pattern which is found. Now, today's discussion, we're going to do this as a discussion, concerns a different concept, not Kedushat Hazman, the holiness of time, but it concerns, and I know I've gone on a little, but we'll get through in time, Kedushat Hamakom, which means the holiness of place, okay? So before I start, I'm going to do this little exercise with you. I encourage you all to contribute. And I ask simply this question. In your mind, when I speak about a Makom Kadosh, a holy place, as opposed to a holy day, when I speak of the term Makom Kadosh, a holy place, what do you think of? And you all can think of whatever you want because there's lots of ways of it. Joseph, go ahead.
The first thing that comes to my mind, well, I'm Catholic, raised Catholic, was the church. So
okay,
inside the church was a holy place. When I go to synagogue and I go to different celebrations at synagogue, it feels like it feels different to me. And so
very good. A synagogue, a church, any place where people encounter and meet God can be a holy place. That's what Joseph is saying. And we could give other places as well. We've talked about synagogues and churches, but houses of study, there are many other examples. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, the Shabbat table.
Shabbat table. All right. Every Friday night, Neil is saying, when he sits down at the Shabbat table and he welcomes the Shabbos into his home and they sanctify the day, this is a Mikdash Ma'at, a small sanctuary. That's, Neil, what it was called, Mikdash Ma'at, because the Sabbath table can be a center of holiness. In the moment that you are sitting with your family and welcoming and celebrating Shabbat, it is a sanctuary. Go ahead, Lori.
So anytime you light candles, so for Hanukkah, Shabbat, Hanukkah, Passover, or to start a holiday or to start a celebration or pray, would be considered a holy space?
Well, it's considered the start of a holy time. The truth is that all holidays, Lori, Shabbat, the major holidays, are always initiated by the act of kindling candles, which is a symbolic way of saying we are now passing from the mundane to the holy, from the secular to that which is kadosh. And by lighting the candles and invoking the blessings, we are creating a space and time that we make holy. The effect of that will be to change everything else. But the lighting of candles is the inaugural ceremony for sanctifying holy time. Now, where else is holy besides? We've talked about the Jewish home can be holy. We've talked about synagogues and churches and mosques can be holy. We've talked about the table. Jerry, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just going to make a comment regarding that you'll probably make a good dissertation on this later in Leviticus concerning Aaron's two sons offering illegitimate or unholy fire, and they were punished for that.
Yeah. Okay. When we talk about unholy, well, at first let's get the good, Jerry. Let's get our concept firm on holy, and then we'll go to the opposite. Okay. I suggested the following. It's very simple. It's not very complex. I suggested a place is made holy by its association with the presence of God. Could you all agree with that? A place can become holy because of its association with the presence of God. And whether that's a synagogue or a church or a house of study, or whether it's a home or wherever it is, wherever people encounter God, meet God, and where that relationship is fostered between God and humanity, that is a holy place, okay? A holy place. And you can probably think of all of them. By the way, just so you don't think I'm too parochial, I've often found my holy places in the mountains, especially in the snow on a snow retreat, standing at the top of a mountain looking at the sky.
How often have you been there?
Often have I been there? Not often, but the point is, my wife is doing a fact check on me. But the truth is, some of the holiest moments I can recall, whether it's Camp Ramah or whether it's at a winter retreat, is standing there surrounded by the beauty of nature, standing by the majesty of hills and mountains and snow and whatever. And I feel God's presence. If you want to talk about where's God with all this, you can't almost stand in a place like that and not feel God's presence. So it doesn't have to be a specifically sanctified place or a specifically religious place. It can be anywhere. Neil, go ahead.
What about just your neshama when you're in prayer and that is a very holy place?
All right. Here's the answer, Neil. What is a holy place? It is a place that is occupied by God, okay? Where does God, what place does God occupy in the world, Neil? We said he would once fill the entire world and then he retreated. Where can God be found today, Neil?
Inside of us.
Wherever we let him in.
Yeah.
Wherever we let him in. Understand this. God is there. He is here. He is now. He appears whenever we let him in. The only thing that stops God from being manifest is our own blindness, our own inability to see and to feel and to address God. If you are a religious individual, you live a life in which you are constantly in God's presence, where you constantly feel God in the acts that you do, in the things that you eat, in the actions that you perform. God is
You don't
in everything.
Here,
Okay. Any other questions?
put your hand up in the square.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Put a hand up in the square if you want to say something. That would be a good way to. Okay. Let's see. Debbie, I see your hand, or I see someone's hand there.
So unmute.
Debbie, unmute and ask your question. No, you're on mute. We still can't hear. Yeah, you've got to unmute. Okay. We can unmute you from this side for
No, I
certain things,
can't.
but we can't unmute you from your side if you're muted. So Debbie, you have to unmute. If you don't know how to do that, I'll come back to you later. Oh, there you
Okay,
go. There you go.
now.
Go ahead.
Now, right?
Now
I
you're good.
have somebody here and he wants to know, are we in the last days?
No.
Well, we're coming to the last days of October,
Okay.
but no. I don't mean to be.
Whatever.
I don't mean to be. No, I can understand the question. It looks like all of these apocalyptic events, these impossible events that have never occurred before, are suddenly occurring. And it might occur to some people who are into apocalyptic thinking to think that this must be the end of the days. We're so much in trouble today that we must be approaching the end. I don't believe that, Debbie. I believe that God still wants us to work this out, that God still intends for us to do this on our own. I don't believe he's sending an apocalypse to do it himself, but I think there are enough signs in the world to warn us that we don't have forever, that God is patient, but he is only so patient. I mean, are earthquakes and floods and fires in Maui and everything signs from God? I don't know, but I'm certainly sure that God isn't happy with us right now. Everything tells you that.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, okay.
No.
Let us continue on. Okay. In the Hebrew Bible, forget now where God appears to us today. Some of you have been students with me for the last 3 years. Where does God appear in the Hebrew Bible? Hands, please, and I'll call upon you. Where do you see God appearing in the Hebrew Bible? Anybody want to tell me where in the Bible God appears? I'll give you. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Is it Exodus when Moses asks, who should I say sends me?
Answer, Jerry, is yes. That's one of the places. Let me broaden it. God appears everywhere in the Torah and in the Tanakh. First of all, before Moses ever existed, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember, Jerry, when God appears to Jacob while he's sleeping in a place called Bethel, and Jacob wakes up and said, I didn't even realize God was here, that God was in this place, and he calls it Bethel. When God appears to Abraham, and he calls to Abraham, and he tells him, don't take the knife, don't slay your son. Now I know you've heard my command. Now I know you fear me. Abraham substitutes Isaac for a ram. God was at the top of Mount Moriah. When God meets the patriarchs, each of the patriarchs has a vision. God is there. Later on, Moses meets God when he's wandering with his father-in-law's sheep at the top of Mount Sinai, and he turns aside to gaze at a strange sight, a bush that's burning that doesn't seem to be consumed. And from the midst of the bush, he hears a voice saying, Moses, don't come any further. Take off your shoes. The land on which you are standing is holy. And Moses removes his shoes. And why is the place holy? Because the fire burns a bush? No, because God is there symbolically. That's why Moses removes his shoes. That's why he can't look at the bush, because he is in the presence of God. There are many other times when Moses meets God. God will speak with Moses many times. In Egypt, God will meet with Moses. When God tells Moses at the end of the Exodus, he tells, take the people and tell them to leave Egypt. And the Jewish people come to the Red Sea, and the people see Pharaoh's armies chasing them. And they say to Moses, what do we do now? Not only does Moses get a vision of God, hear God's word, a miracle is performed for him. After the 10 miracles, the 10 plagues in Egypt, God says to Moses, lift up your staff over the water. Moses lifted up his staff. The waters of the Red Sea divide. The Jewish people pass on safely. They get to the other side. Moses lifts his staff and the waters return. 50 days later, the Jewish people, 50 days after leaving Egypt, they come to Mount Sinai. There at the top of a mountain, there's a cloud. Moses goes up to the top of the mountain. The people stand at the base of Sinai, and they hear God say to Moses, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Holy place, okay? When the Jewish people wander in the wilderness, God is constantly there and constantly showing them support and protection. When the Jewish people finish their 40 years of wilderness, just so you don't think the miracles end in the desert, when Joshua is about to cross the Jordan River, another miracle occurs. And you could say God was at the Jordan River, causing the river to split so the Jewish people could proceed forward. The truth is that God seems to be all over the place. But here's the interesting thing. Are any of those places still identifiable and holy today? Is Mount Sinai still holy? No. Is the Jordan River where they crossed holy? No. Is the Red Sea holy? No, nor the place. As a matter of fact, in many of those places, we don't even know where it was. If you ask me, which mountain did God meet Moses on? I can't tell you, because God never sanctified the mountain. He never said, this mountain is God's mountain. Well, he called it God. It's called God's mountain, but that's because where God appeared to the people. It's not holy. The Jordan River is not holy. Even the tabernacle that the Jewish people built in the wilderness moved around. It made many, many stops. It made 40 some odd stops in the wilderness. Do you know where it stopped? I have a list of names, but I don't know where it was. If you went back to any of those 40 stops, could you find holiness? No, holiness doesn't continue to exist. It only exists as long as God is present. Holiness is transitory, okay? When God encounters his people, stop yelling. I'm going to stop yelling. When God encounters his people, he meets them and he enters into a relationship with them. That moment is holy. But the problem with places like that is they do not remain holy. Just like holy moments come and go, holy places come and go as well. And therefore, you can look throughout the Hebrew Bible, all kinds of places where God addresses the patriarchs or addresses Moses or addresses David or addresses the prophets. There are many, many locations, but not, with one exception, none of them became holy. There is only one place that is mentioned in all of the discussion of the Torah and subsequently in the discussion of the Tanakh of the Hebrew Bible. There is only one place where it becomes permanent. Interestingly, none of these spaces retain their holiness today. Many of them cannot even be located, with the exception of, okay, go ahead, Michael.
The temple.
The temple specifically, and more broadly, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
All right. So I can speak of a holy place, But you can say, well, there are many holy places, but what is the holy place? Rabbi, is there a holy place that once was part of Jewish history and remains an integral part of Jewish contemporary life? Yes, the answer is the Temple Mount, where the temple stood, and Jerusalem. What is it about the Temple Mount and Jerusalem that enables us to call them holy places? I've just told you that God appears in certain times and certain places, then he doesn't appear, then he's gone. As soon as God leaves, the sign is Elvis is no longer in the house. God is no longer in the house, okay? God is not here anymore, okay? The holiness dissipates. Even the tabernacle, by the way, remember the tabernacle, that holy structure the Jewish people built in the wilderness? It moves with the Jewish people from place to place in their journeys, but none of the places it ever stops is considered holy. And nowadays, we don't even know where those places are. We don't have a tabernacle. Okay, here, this one, please.
1086.
Oh, hold on, we're going to take it there. There you go. Okay, those places don't exist anymore. There is only one place, which even after God's presence as represented by the Beit HaMikdash and other things, only one place that is still holy, even though it is not theoretically, God is not necessarily there today. And that place is the Holy Temple. Can someone explain to me why, of all these places and of all these things, why it is only the Holy Temple and the area where it was located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, why that's the only place that's still holy? I know, I think Valencia is holy, but Randy assures me that that's not true. She thinks it's Pico Robertson neighborhood.
No, I think it's Central Park.
No, she thinks it's Central Park in New York. But without being flippant, why is the Beit HaMikdash, the Temple Mount, the place where the temple was built by Solomon, the place where, according to tradition, Abraham was ready to sacrifice his son Isaac to God, why was that place considered holy? Jerry, go ahead.
Are you getting at because it is one of the few or only places still existing?
That said the last part again, Jerry?
It's one of the few places still existing that you can geographically map it.
Yeah, although I can probably match up some other parts. I know God spoke to Abram in Hebron, and I know about where Hebron is. I don't know where the cave of, well, I do know where the cave of Machpelah is, according to tradition. But it's not just because we know where the Temple Mount is. That is true. The reason that we know where the Temple Mount is, Jerry, I'd do it the other way. It was so holy that even after it was destroyed several times by the Babylonians and the Romans, it never lost its sanctity. Why didn't it lose its sanctity? Theoretically, Jerry, it should have lost its sanctity the moment the temple was burnt down and the Jews were exiled. Why didn't it ever lose its sanctity? Go ahead, Jerry. You got the floor.
Well, then I would say because God didn't want it to. He wanted it to survive.
All right. So here we go. The next level question. Why didn't the Holy Temple and why didn't Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, lose its holiness? Because God didn't want it to. Good answer. Now I'll ask the next question. Why didn't God want it to? What was so special about it? That's a good answer. But what was so special about Jerusalem and about the Temple Mount that God says this place stays holy even when it's destroyed? Michael and then Neil. Mm-hmm.
So that's where a bunch of Jewish ritual happens. There are laws about these are the ways you connect with God at the temple. Sacrifices happen this time of year. Kohen Gadol actually gets to meet God at that spot every year.
Very good.
That doesn't change.
Okay. Neil, you want to add anything to that?
Also that it's been rebuilt.
Well, it has been rebuilt, but Jerusalem doesn't look anything like what it did at the time when Solomon built his temple. It certainly doesn't look like anything like it did at the time of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. I'm going to suggest another deceptively simple answer. A place designated to a holy place is a place designated and dedicated to the service of God. If there is a place where God specifically says, this is my house, this is my home, this is my holy city, this is where I shall dwell, that is a holy place designated to the service of God, whether it was a temporary structure like the Mishkan or the tabernacle, whether it was eventually the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem. God says, some things change. I'm not always present anywhere, but everywhere, but I will always be present here. Temple, no temple. Even when there are only ruins, Jerusalem remains my Ir HaKodesh, my holy city. Just like Israel, even when it is persecuted and it lies in a basement, is his holy people. God doesn't change his mind. His holy city is his holy city. His holy people is his holy people. Whatever happens, that doesn't change. Now, let me ask you a question. I just told you that Jerusalem is a place of holiness, okay? How holy is Jerusalem? Well, it depends on how religious you are. If you are an Orthodox Jew, you're not allowed to go up to the Temple Mount. Did you know that? If you go to Jerusalem and you go to the city and you go to East Jerusalem, to the old city, and right at the edge, you see the Temple Mount. And you get as close as you possibly can the Western Wall. The Western Wall really isn't that holy itself. It was just the retaining wall on the west side of the temple. It has no inherent holiness itself. There is one spot in Jerusalem which is so inherently holy that Jews are not allowed to go up on it, according to many in Jewish life. And that spot is the Temple Mount. Now, can you go up to the Temple Mount? You physically can. If you were not religious, or if you are religious and you know what the precautions are, there are ways you can go up. But normally, Jews do not walk up there. Why? Because they're not exactly sure where the ancient temple stood. And even when it is destroyed, every place on the Temple Mount where the temple once stood is considered holy. And unless you have gone through certain rituals and certain practices, you cannot be allowed to go up there. So if I were to go to Jerusalem next year and I wanted to go up, if I chose to go up, if as a religious Jew, I might not, I would have to go to the mikveh, and I know where the temple, I know because of geography and archaeology where the temple stood, and I knew the perimeter, the area around which I could walk without invading sacred space. I also have the advantage that I'm a Kohen, and as a Kohen, I'm allowed to enter spaces that non-Kohens are not allowed to enter. But the point is, until the Messiah comes, that site is holy. No Jew stands where the temple stood. Even a Kohen is not supposed to stand within the area that was once bounded by the temple, because he is ritually impure, because we're all ritually impure, because we have all made contact directly or indirectly with a corpse. And because we have made contact with a corpse, we have a form of tumah which can only be resolved with the egel haz, with the ashes of the red heifer. Okay, so until we find the red heifer again, even Kohanim who are not really pure can't be purified to go up to the Temple Mount. All right. Interestingly enough, the Temple Mount, though it is known, is not a space where we actually go. So we don't make pilgrimages to Mount Sinai. We don't make pilgrimages to the Red Sea. We don't make pilgrimages to the Jordan River and try and figure out where the Jewish people crossed over. We don't make pilgrimages to even Jerusalem. We say we make a pilgrimage, but the city of Jerusalem is not inherently itself entirely the holy city. There is only one spot in Jerusalem that is inherently considered holy, and that's taken very seriously. So here's my question to you. Where do we find God today? If you don't happen to live in Israel, if you happen not to be visiting Jerusalem, if you are so religious that you won't go up to the Temple Mount, and if you any other place where God once spoke to Israel, you could go there and scream as much as you want, but God's not going to hear you. You can go to the base of what was called Mount Sinai and yell up, God, I'm here again, speak to me. God's not going to speak to you. In the absence of places, the one place that was identified as holy in the Bible and retained its holiness throughout, where can we find God? Okay, I've taken you through the Bible. Okay, oh, we got it. Okay, taking you through the Bible. I've told you where in the Bible God can be found, wherever God encounters human beings. Since that time, where God doesn't encounter us in the same way he encountered the prophets or the patriarchs or Moses, since we don't have Jerusalem anymore, it's destroyed and it is holy, but we cannot meet God there. Where can we meet God? Go ahead, Jerry.
Are you possibly referring to the Shabbat service?
Shabbat is the time in which we can meet God. That is correct. Shabbat is one of the times in which we can meet God. Jewish holidays are another. But where is the place where we can meet God? The answer is everywhere and anywhere you let him in. Okay? You want to know the answer? You can meet God anywhere. You do not have to stand on the holy mount, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to find him. You don't have to go up to Mount Sinai, if you could identify it, and go up there to find him. You don't go to Carmel, where Elijah had the contest with the prophets. You won't find him there. Wherever you are sensitive, wherever God encounters you, wherever you meet God in your life, that place in which you meet God is holy, and the time in which you meet God is holy. What am I saying to you? God is everywhere so long as you let him in. But if you don't let him in, he's not there. That's the trouble with contracting. God contracts and then he says, all right, I want you to play hide and seek with me. I'm hiding, find me. But the trouble with hide and seek is if the people who are supposed to seek forget that they're supposed to seek, there's no game. There is no game to play. If God is hiding and we don't even bother to search for him anymore, then we're never going to find him. Not in any place, not in any time. So God gives us holy times, and he designates the idea of every place being holy if only we turn to that place to find God. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples, all right? I've already given you a couple. Where do I find God? And this is personal, and then you guys can go ahead and tell me where you find God. Okay. Some of them are very personal and private, individual, but I'll share them with you anyway. My mom passed away many years ago.
How old are you? 74?
Huh?
44 years ago.
44 years ago. My mom passed away 44 years ago. The year after she passed away, I went to high holiday services. No, it wasn't the year. It was that next high holiday service. She passed away in June. It was that September, 44 years ago. And I was sitting, for those of you who know the Ramat Zion, it was Temple Ramah in those days. And I was sitting there, and I can't explain to you what happened, but I was thinking of her and mourning the fact that she wasn't going to be with me on the holidays. And suddenly I felt a warmth within me. And suddenly, I kid you not, this day which had been overcast, the sun suddenly came out and began to glow. And I knew my mother was there. I just knew it. God was there. I knew, and my mother was God. And I knew this was a holy moment. And for the next 20 minutes, I just sat there and enjoyed it. And then I stopped. And then the light started to, the clouds came back over and covered it. That was a holy moment. When I go to Camp Ramah, whether I'm in the Beit Knesset at the synagogue in Camp Ramah or not, when I'm just at Ramah and I'm seeing people interacting with each other, or sitting at a meal and we're davening, a whole group of people, campers and staff together, I feel God's presence. There are so many times in my life that I really feel God's presence. I, believe it or not, and you have to develop the sensitivity. When I wake up in the morning, my wife will testify, the first thing after saying Modeh Lefenecha, acknowledging God, I wash my hands and recite the prayers because I feel God's presence each morning, and I thank him for giving me another day. Okay. I don't know if you can manage to do that, but if you can find God not only in any moment you search for him, but wherever you are and you let him in, you have discovered the secret of holiness. Any place can be holy. Any time can be holy. Certain times are more propitious. As Joseph stated, a church, a synagogue is a place designated. And sometimes when we walk into it, it sets our mood. It changes our psychology. It enables us to feel God's presence. But it doesn't have to be a church. It doesn't have to be a synagogue. It doesn't even have to be your own table on Shabbos, although that's a great place to experience God. Neil, go ahead.
The urban legend about if you lose one of your five senses, some of the other senses become more sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
As I've been challenged with what I've got going on with me, my connection, my neshama, is become much more empowered and much more sensitive to uh, uh, everything that I do. In other words, I can't tell you when I don't think of it, so to speak. Uh, in the shower, we were at a restaurant the other day, and a lady was getting some baked goods, and she was saying she was taking it home for her sick mom with COVID. And I know the owner, and I said, just we'll take care of that. In other words, it's not with forethought. It's just my first thought.
Absolutely.
And I think it has to do more with trying to do more with less of what I've got going for me.
It's a perfect analogy, Neil, and I think that's very apt. Sometimes when we lose one of our five senses, our other senses become sharpened. I remember a story, true story, about a young man when I was in Hillel, when I was president of Hillel at UCLA, and there was a guy who regularly came, and his name was Doug, and he was blind. And I always used to think, and he came to services regularly, and he had a book in Braille that he read. And he could do all the prayer service he could daven, except instead of reading it, he did it with his fingers. And I remember one weekend we were there for Shabbaton, and someone forgot to turn the lights on before Shabbat in a certain room. So as the day was ending and it was getting darker and darker, we realized we couldn't do the service because none of us could read the prayer because we couldn't see because it was too dark in the room. And he said, no problem. He took his Braille book and he davened the evening service. So you talk about what we couldn't do because we couldn't see, but what I regarded as a liability turned out to be a blessing for all of us. Neil, you are absolutely correct. Sometimes we are so caught up with the physical that it takes challenges to our physical being to create a sensitivity to the spiritual. And many times people will tell you that they only discover these great insights of spirits when they've been challenged physically. Very good, Neil. Thank you. My wife is writing me something it would be easier for her to ask me, but she's still writing. So anybody else? Okay, she wrote it to me. She says, oh, okay. Yes, you're right. Okay.
Just in general.
Yeah, yes, you are right. Okay. Look, what do I tell you? Am I telling you you have to be stricken before you appreciate God? Am I telling you you first have to suffer lack before you can feel God's presence? No, I'm not telling you that. Although, Neil, I understand what you're going through now. You're in the process of looking for a kidney donor so that your life can change. You found God, Neil, precisely at a time when the external facts around you were becoming more difficult. And rather than make you bitter or turn you off to it, you suddenly felt in the midst of your physical challenge, the presence of God. I can't explain why that happens, but I know it's true. I know that God gives us one challenge, but then he opens up a possibility to see many other things, many other possibilities. And I trust that there are other possibilities coming for you. But you shouldn't have to go through pain in order to appreciate the good. If I could only tell you, you don't have to suffer in order to find God. You will find him when you suffer. And believe me, there are a lot of people who in the pain of October the 7th have discovered in the midst of their sorrow and their loss and their anguish, they have discovered God's healing presence. But hopefully we can do it without having to go through that kind of pain and punishment and travail. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Go ahead, Lori.
I think sometimes we just take every day for granted, and it's not until we experience adversity that perhaps it changes our way of thinking and heightens our awareness that maybe we should be looking to God in this time
Very good.
when, we should be doing it all the time, but for me, that doesn't always happen. I'm just preoccupied with other things until something comes along that makes me more aware.
A year ago, Lori, that happened to me. I didn't take God for granted. God was part of my life, but I took my life for granted, and I took my health for granted, and I took the blessings that I enjoyed for granted. And then suddenly one fall, and it changed my attitude toward life. You are right. It shouldn't take calamity or challenge or disease or whatever. It shouldn't take that to wake us up to God's presence. Sometimes, given the fact that we're human and we're caught up in our own day-to-day, Lori, our own anxieties and concerns, we don't see the big picture. And it's sometimes only when we're forced to stop, either because of a tragic event or something in the world, that we suddenly realize we weren't seeing the picture right to begin with. That's the whole object of holiness. Last week with Holy Time, this thing with Holy Place. What I'm telling you is our job is to bring God back into the world. Every single one of us can do it for ourselves, for our families, for the people around us. Okay? And even though it's hard, it's possible to be done, and it can be done, and it is in fact real. It is in fact real because God is everywhere, even when we don't feel him. Anybody else? I came up early tonight. All right. All right. Well, I'm not going to keep you just because I finished early. Today we talked about, okay, we're